defense. The GRU is the Russian state's most powerful and feared intelligence agency.
They carry out espionage, trying to gain our state secrets. They carry out assassinations and assassination attempts. The GRU are very substantial, they're well over 10,000 strong. They pose a real threat to Western countries.
In Britain, the government rips up the diplomatic rule book, expelling 23 Russians from their embassy, and directly accuses Russia.
The government has concluded that it is highly likely that Russia was responsible for the act against Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
Britain launches an international diplomatic offensive. The UK's ambassador to the United Nations lays out the government's case.
As we got the evidence and as we made the analysis, we realised that the Russians were the only people with the motive, the operational experience, if you like, and the technical means to have carried out an attack like this.
In Russia, President Putin's popularity only increases. He's re-elected with a huge majority. He accuses Britain of provocation and denies any involvement in Salisbury.
И первое, что приходит в голову, что если бы это было боевое отравляющее вещество, люди, конечно, погибли бы на месте. Это первое. Второе, у России нет никаких средств.
The British then up the ante, challenging President Putin on his home turf, in the gilded salons of the British Embassy, right across the Moscow River from the Kremlin.
Foreign diplomats have always loved coming to this historic mansion to be wined and dined. And now they came to watch a PowerPoint presentation, making the British case and pointing to Russia's guilt.
The international response is unprecedented. 27 countries throw out 153 Russian diplomats, who they accuse of spying.
I think the Russians underestimated the international and domestic revulsion at the use of chemical weapons. I think they thought they would, if anything, take a small hit in London, and they ended up with this united response, which I think took them by surprise.
But why would Russia want to kill an old spy now living in Britain? I'm travelling east across Russia to meet a former KGB man who studied the official files on Sergei Skripal's career.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, the ideology disappeared. It was a spiritual loss, not just for Skripal. It was a tough and painful moment for me too.
In 1993, Sergei, the GRU spy, was sent to Spain. His cover story, a diplomat in the Russian embassy in Madrid.
In Spain, he thought less about serving his country, more about using his job to make money.
Sergei became a prime target for British intelligence, MI6.
When he came to Spain, British intelligence targeted him and recruited him. I must say, I respect them for that. He got $3,000 a month, and if it was good information, they would add a bonus.
He was now a double agent. MI6 named him Agent Forthwith, a direct route for them into the GRU, notoriously hard to crack.
First, he betrayed his friends who worked undercover. In all, he gave away more than 100 names. It was a huge loss.
Sergei was recalled to Moscow in 1996. His health was poor. He was promoted to head of personnel for the GRU. Now, Sergei Skripal had access to the telephone directory of all Russia's military spies across the world.
Sergei Skripal opened a window into the Russian military, which was of critical importance at that time.
John Cipher used to run CIA operations in Russia.
For an intelligence service, files of others and where they are and their foibles and their problems and their personal issues would have been something quite important.
If you're going to understand the sort of threat that Russia poses to the West, then you need to understand the thinking and the operations and the assets of the Russian intelligence agencies, which is why we in MI6 were committed to penetrating the Russian intelligence agencies, including the GRU.
Sergei was careful not to meet his British paymasters in Moscow, but he took expensive holidays abroad to brief his handlers. The net gradually closed around him as the spy himself was spied on.
He was caught the way all spies are caught. First, by overspending, and second, by not being careful.
Sergei Skripal was arrested in 2004. He was tried and sentenced to 13 years in a penal colony. But greater forces conspired to release him from prison. Sir John Sawers was head of MI6 at the time.
He was convicted of working for a British intelligence. It was important that we got him back.
Vienna, July 2010. Scene of a Cold War-style spy swap. 10 Russian spies caught in America, exchanged for 4 men. One of them, Sergei Skripal.
There was a presidential pardon, a release from prison, a formal swap, which in the past has always been honoured by both sides.
The former KGB spy, Vladimir Putin, wasn't president when Sergei was pardoned, but made it clear what he thought of traitors.
Что касается предателей, они сами загнутся. И какие бы 30 серебряников эти люди не получали, они колом встанут у них в горле.
So Sergei and Ludmilla, with Yulia, came to Britain. In 2011, MI6 helped them settle in a quiet part of Salisbury. But Sergei must have known the GRU never forget a traitor. Like Colonel Popov, who spied for America in the 50s and was caught.
There are stories that were put out through the Russian intelligence services. He was burned in a fire and videotaped, and that every new class that came into the GRU was shown the videotape of Mr. Popov being burned alive to make it clear what were the price of betrayal to the state.
Shouldn't you have protected him more? He was an ex-agent.
Well, I think this question of what level of protection you provide for people who have been released and swapped in this way, it varies from individual to individual. Now clearly we got that calculation wrong, that the threat against Skripal was much higher than we expected, because we hadn't expected the Russians to go back on a presidential pardon.
A year after the Skripals arrived in Salisbury, Sergei's wife died of cancer. He began travelling to Eastern Europe, NATO countries Russia considers a threat.
43 секунды, абсолютно. Он будет стоять.
Alexei Venediktov is a respected independent Russian commentator.
Однако мои разговоры с
My conversations with former intelligence officers revealed that after Skripal was expelled from Russia, he helped NATO operations, he talked to them and worked against his country.
работал против своей страны.
It's believed Sergei met and briefed intelligence services in the Czech Republic and Estonia, once part of the Soviet Union.
The Russian intelligence veterans explained, if you carry on not just consulting, but actively working against your country, then you continue to be a traitor. Then your pardon is not valid, and you must be punished.
Тогда вы должны быть наказаны.
Did he travel to Eastern Europe? Did he talk to those intelligence agents?
He was involved in exchanges which are entirely normal and they were largely historic. I don't believe that Skripal was a thorn in the flesh of the Russians after he'd been released, and certainly there's nothing which would justify the sort of operation that was conducted against him and his daughter.
In Salisbury, it takes 2 weeks of painstaking investigation for scientists and police to work out exactly how the Skripals came into contact with the Novichok.
To find the source of the Novichok actually was our first breakthrough. We identified that it was Novichok on the front door handle of their home address. It shocked me that it had been used in such a reckless manner on the front door of an address in Salisbury.
Russia has form when it comes to killing enemies in Britain. A poisoned umbrella on Waterloo Bridge, radioactive polonium in a teacup in Mayfair.
What we know is that the Russians have a long history of developing highly toxic poisons in order to kill people. We believe that they have at least trained on this technique of putting nerve agents, including putting them on door handles.
Did it help you when you knew that it had been on the door handle and you didn't know that when you entered the house?
It helped in some ways. I, at that point, knew, well, it's not something that I've done wrong, because that was a big thing for me. Such a outrageous, dangerous way of doing something that it angered me as well, because any number of people could have been affected by that.
Have you any idea how you got it on you? I mean, if you were wearing gloves?
No, I don't know. I don't know whether it's gone through the gloves. I don't know whether, I mean, I could have adjusted my face mask and my goggles whilst I was in the house with it being on my hand.
Did you have any regrets that you hadn't sent him in better protected against this?
Well, I guess hindsight's a wonderful thing. The emergency services will respond to what's in front of them, unless there's something obvious which would indicate that actually they should be wearing personal protective equipment, which gives them that higher level of protection. Then we take things as we find them.
In Salisbury Hospital, the patients are showing signs of recovery, their vital organs beginning to function again.
We recognised that with nerve agent poisoning there was potentially a long road ahead. No one really had any useful clinical experience of this particular agent. As it happened, things did start to turn around probably more quickly than we had anticipated.
I said all along I want to walk out of hospital with my wife, which we did in the end, and being able to do that, be able to walk out of hospital after 2.5 weeks of going through what I went through was incredible. I'm thankful to the scientists, and I'm thankful to the staff at the hospital.
Shortly after Nick Bailey's recovery, Yulia wakes from a coma. Hopes are raised that Sergei will pull through too.
It was something we hadn't dared to hope for in the early days. But actually, as you can imagine, we were all delighted to see those patients respond to the treatment that we were able to give.
So what of President Putin's taunt that no one could survive a military-grade nerve agent?
Maybe the dose was not high enough. Salisbury was rainy and muggy. Novichok breaks down in damp conditions, weakening its toxicity. It's the Achilles heel of Novichok.
In the weeks after the Salisbury attack, Russia ramps up its denial of responsibility with a blizzard of propaganda.
The Russian concept of information is really that it's a weapon.
Ben Nimmo monitors how Russia uses disinformation as a weapon in the age of the internet.
A good way to understand the techniques of Russian information warfare is you can think of the 4 Ds: dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. So dismiss, you'll insult the other side, you'll try and make them seem valueless.
Are some things in your life shit? Well, we have the answer. In case you missed it, you can now get yourself a Russian to blame.
Distort, you'll actually twist the facts to suit your story.
Britain's own chemical lab, Porton Down, admitted it had micro stockpiles.
Distract, you will accuse your accuser of doing the same thing.
Они говорят о том, что это может быть вполне выгодно и британским спецслужбам, которые известны своими способностями действовать с лицензией на убийство.
And dismay, you will say that terrible things happen if this continues.
Хрущев сказал однажды британцам: мне достаточно 2 ракеты, и ваших островов не будет. Заткнулись вперед на 20 лет.
Feature that you throw out as many competing theories as you can to confuse people as much as you can.
The most audacious attempt to sow confusion starts here in Moscow, in a building called the Center for the Control of Everyday Activities. In reality, it's home to the GRU's sophisticated hacking unit. The GRU target The Hague at a critical time. The chemical weapons watchdog, the OPCW, is based here. It's testing samples from Salisbury.
The OPCW have very, very high technical standards, and they were able to verify our findings independently that this was a Novichok, a highly toxic substance.
This is the Russian hacking team arriving in The Hague. They're caught red-handed with their kit in a car parked outside the watchdog. But Russia had already stolen data from a lab working on the Salisbury samples. The Russian foreign minister uses it to falsely claim a Western nerve agent, not Novichok, is to blame.
По итогам проведенной экспертизы в пробах обнаружены следы токсичного химиката PZ и его прекурсора.
For the Russian foreign minister, first of all, to identify a laboratory and then to make a completely false accusation based on this, what they alleged this laboratory to have said, was extraordinary.
So the foreign minister was lying?
Yes. They weren't just running one counter-narrative. It's almost pick your own conspiracy theory. Here are more than 30 that we've prepared earlier.
In April, Victoria Skripal gets an unexpected call. It's her cousin Yulia calling from Salisbury Hospital. This will become an opportunity for Russia to make more false claims.
I was overjoyed and realized that if I could hear her voice, at least she was alive.
Victoria records the phone call. Within hours, it's being played on Russian state TV. Russia uses the call to claim Sergei and Yulia are being held in Britain against their will. People feel that you were being used by the Russian state, and this phone call was very convenient for Russia at this point.
Yes, I don't know. I cannot say whether it was a setup or not. I have nothing to do with the Russian government or Russian special services. We're simply little people who have been dragged into a big political game, and it is certainly very tough.
Caught between the crisis engulfing the Skripal family and the Russian state, Victoria wants me to meet Sergei's mother, Yelena. She's in her 90s and has already lost one of her 2 sons.
Можешь что-нибудь сыну сказать? Сыну можешь что-нибудь на камеру сказать? Сергею? Да, да. Ну что? Что мы его очень любим.
Yelena only knows that Sergei and Yulia haven't been well. She hasn't been told they're at the center of an international storm.
И хотим, чтобы поговорить по телефону, чтобы голос услышать хоть.
You miss him, obviously. You miss him.
Конечно. Он у меня один. Остался.
Five weeks after the attack, Yulia is finally able to leave Salisbury Hospital. Her father is discharged 6 weeks later. Their whereabouts remains a closely guarded secret.
How is Sergei Skripal?
I think he's recovering. I think he'll be badly shaken, as his daughter is badly shaken as well. But they're robust individuals, and I'm sure that they will recover and lead a life with much greater anonymity than the one they had before.
So will the UK be looking after them for the foreseeable future?
We will certainly look after people in that position.
Yulia briefly appears in public to deny continuing Russian claims the Skripals have been abducted by the British.
Я признательна российскому посольству за предложенную помощь, но сейчас я не готова и не хочу ей воспользоваться.
The scar on Yulia's neck from emergency treatment following the attempt on her life is clear to see.
Шокирует сам факт использования нейрополитического вещества в данной ситуации. Процесс оздоровления был медленным и очень болезненным. Не хочу вдаваться в детали, скажу лишь, что лечение было инвазивным и глубоко угнетающим.
The details of the assassination plot against the Skripals are now becoming clear. Yulia's car parked outside her Moscow home, just as she left it before setting off on the trip that nearly cost her her life.
The Russians were particularly brutal and callous